Hey y'all, welcome back to the Takeoff. I'm your host Max Henry, and I'm so excited to share today's guest with y'all. We've got Matt McInnes Watson, originally from the UK, then in California, now in Eastern Tennessee, and yet another guest who has a much nicer podcast studio set up than I do. But that's why we get the best people on to talk about things they're experts in, and in Matt's case, it's plyometrics. I was really excited and curious to hear his thoughts on where plyometrics stacks up against parkour in terms of general training for Gen Pop or professional athletes, and also how parkour athletes can incorporate plyometrics into their training, which is something that, if you know me and you followed my training, I've done extensively for probably the last 10 years. And if he thought that it would even be worth it, or if there's too much overlap, I think that whether you're a coach or a practitioner or athlete, you're going to get a ton out of this episode. It was really, really fun to get to chat with somebody who's such an expert in their field and has just a massively broad and simultaneously hyper-specific expertise. And just, yeah, absolutely fantastic conversation. I will get out of the way and let y'all enjoy it. Thank you as always for listening. Here's Matt.
In terms of any form of urban environment, like the US is just so different to what parkour climates would look like with regards to the differences to, you know, older cities in Europe and all that sort of stuff. So I get it. I get it. And it was kind of, my eyes were kind of open to it when Tim came out to visit us. So it's funny. It's funny how he observed the world in comparison to how I observed it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he's just like looking at different little like parking structures and stuff. And I feel
Yeah.
like prior to parkour, my travels through that part of England would have just been like,
Mm.
oh, sheep, lots of rolling hills, more sheep. Nice. This is very bucolic and chill.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
Well,
exactly.
this is a good time to introduce you officially, Matt McInnes Watson, aka the Plyo Guy. I feel like I had to throw that in there. You apparently have 130 of the folks who follow me specifically from parkour are following you, so I'm sure many of the listeners are already very familiar with your work. But thanks so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. Yeah, it's I don't, you know, when you're like, did I give myself the name? Have I like, I haven't
Oh, I
helped
know.
myself. I definitely haven't helped myself in terms of, I'm just like, oh, I'm just going to lean into it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
apparently that guy. So I'll just be that guy.
The
And
the funniest thing about the internet is that you just have to distill. You're like, okay, how can I take the complexity of the human experience and distill it into 3 words that random people will be able to like conceptualize in the 4 seconds they spend engaging with whatever it is I'm trying to share. And if you actually care about what you want to share, you're like, I kind of have to do that so that they can like pay attention, but also always a weird experience.
I'm not even sure it's 4 seconds either. Like it's just, I think it's continually getting worse as well. So, yeah, it's a unique experience of trying to understand how to, you know, like you say, you're trying to help people, you're trying to educate people, or you're trying to, I don't know, give them an experience that you've experienced. And like you say, it's like attention capturing first before anything. And you know, we most of us fall to that and have to play the game a little bit. But you know, I think there are ways to do that. I've just, you know, I continually learn how to do that, and I think it changes constantly as well. That never helps. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty unique.
Yeah, you haven't stooped to just like the exclusively shirtless clapback response videos. I think that's the lowest tier. When you get there, that's when it's really there's no longer Matt McInnes Watson. It is just the Plyo Guy. You fully
Yeah,
inhabited the persona.
yeah, yeah. That's
Well, I wanted to say because you came out here in 2019, and I think that that's probably like 2018, 2019. I remember seeing your content, Angus Bradley, a few other people who are kind of popping up as the hybrid slash plyometric movement. I feel like I don't know if this is your perspective, and I'm really curious on what your experience of this time was, but for me, it felt like I suddenly saw a swell of people getting into this like general physical preparedness space and
mm,
realizing that they were like, oh, I can squat triple body weight, but if I land from a 12-inch block. Like my knees have now incapacitated me for multiple weeks. Maybe
Yeah.
that's not healthy. And I think that you were the first person I saw who really started sharing a lot of this plyometric stuff in a way that was accessible. What motivated you to take more of this online? Like, what was your journey like that? And how's it been to see the explosion of plyometric training? I just was listening
Mm.
before this to your chat with Tim Riley on the Coach 'em Up podcast, and I had Alec Blennis on here a couple months ago, and it's so cool to see, especially here in the U.S., so many athletes just adopting variations of what you've been talking about.
Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting because it very much relates back to the conversations that I had with my mentor and coach Eric, and we kind of spoke. He kind of mentioned this to me probably in 2013, 14, and he was like, so much of the stuff that we do and the topics that we discuss and how we look at movement and how we see movement as something that should be performance related all the way down to completely gen pop related. Because at the time he was, what would he have been? So what was that? 12, 13. So he would have been 65 and he was still doing a ton of plyos and speed work with us and
Yeah.
I was a high jumper at the time. But he said that so few people have adopted this. So like I came into, the online space just talking about what I'd done for the last decade with Eric. And I was just like, this is just like normal life for us. Like this is like, I see everyone from 10-year-old youth athletes to we had 250 plus masters decathletes that were training with us. One of them had never trained before the age of 45, and the other one had been an athlete in track and field since he was 12. So I saw so many different ways in which people were using dynamic movement, but it was very much in a very small silo of people. And we knew other coaches in the performance world that had similar education, were instilling a lot of this work with performance athletes. But I don't think anyone that we knew, obviously someone else out there was definitely doing it. But like the small group that we were within, they weren't talking about it on a global like scale in terms of like how can we get everyone from the elderly to team sports to track and field. And I think it kind of was my pursuit from when I became a coach. Like I understood that coaching in track and field wasn't necessarily going to be the thing that was going to feed my family eventually. I knew that it's a very volunteering based kind of sport in the UK, as it is in most places, to be honest with you. But I knew that I'd had to delve into anything from team sport to individual sports like tennis or whatever. And so like it set me on a journey to be like, well, I want to take so much of what Eric had taught me and continue to, I guess, not water it down, but like, how do I hit the bottom of the broad part of the pyramid, right? Of very general people. And I still want to work in performance sport. I still love performance and elite performance, but yeah, how can I put it down all the way to my mum who's 65? And what is important about that? And so, yeah, it was kind of weird. Like I came on and people were like, oh my gosh, like I've never seen some of this stuff before. And I was just like, it's such a strange thing. Like when you've done it for so long, it just, it was kind of strange to get that reception. And it's ultimately probably why a lot of people kind of leaned into it. And again, like it's not like I was bringing new information to the table. Like that information had gone through Eric, who had learned it in the 70s, and the guy who taught him was doing it in the late 50s. So like it's not new. It's just I just don't think it had been distilled from world-class track and field all the way down to an average gym goer. Like, what can this do for me? Well, let's say that I have fun doing strength work, or maybe I've got into a bit of Olympic lifting. how is jumping around and doing any form of reactive or dynamic work, how's that going to help me? What if it just made me
Yeah.
feel good? What if I just felt better when I did a lift, or felt better when I go out for a 5 mile run? And I think people are just more and more open to a broader sense of training now. And I think the hybrid space has for sure helped that. The Olympic lifting space has, which is kind of bred, I think personally, on a larger scale from CrossFit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of those, like I work in a lot of elite sports where both are like CrossFit and hybrid training just gets absolutely like shit on all the time.
Demolished. Yeah.
So like,
100%.
but ultimately there has to have been a CrossFit thing that's entered the Gen Pop space where there is performance at the top, and then there is, your average
Mm-hmm.
60-year-old still able to do a CrossFit class. And how is that kind of disseminated through to dynamic movement and plyos? They sure as hell don't do it well. So it's like, well, how can we help, major, sports or forms of training to be better at that?
Yeah. Are you saying that box jumps for time does not count as plyometric
It's just-
movement?
I just if it,
Breaking news.
even if it is, it's just not good. Like it just doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't sit well with me to just see that like back and
I
forth and back.
love, yeah, I know my wife's transitioned, not exclusively, she still does parkour quite a bit, but she was very into parkour, and then she's picked up CrossFit as well. And there's a few other really high level female athletes in the parkour space that have kind of moved heavier into CrossFit.
Mm,
And I think one thing that you said, and it's interesting you bring up Olympic weightlifting. I think that as those things have been popularized, the perceived skill barrier for other sports or disciplines or methods, modalities has kind of gone down, because people see, again, like you said, a 60-year-old like muscle snatching with crazy press outs, and they're like, well, okay, that's not really a snatch, but if she can try Olympic lifting, how bad could it be for me to try hops, even if I'm not
yeah.
doing it in the most efficient way? It was kind of like, I feel like it gave people permission to suck at something long enough to
Yes.
stick with it and eventually get good.
Yeah.
And parkour, it's been really interesting for me to watch, because when I listen to you talk about plyos on, and I've gotten to listen to some podcasts where you've been with more sort of like Gen Pop, or even coaches who are working with elite athletes, the idea of hops being confusing, that movement pattern I learned so long ago, and it's so ubiquitous in my sport
Yeah.
that it's almost hard to remember. Like, oh yeah, people don't jump
We're
off a
gonna do
leg
this.
and land on the same leg and have to
Yeah.
learn, like, but it's so helpful. And then not only the stimulus from the novelty, but obviously what's happening in the body is going to be really different and has a lot of transfer. But I think that the way that you've managed to break it down, like you said, not finding the lowest common denominator, but finding the entry point, so that people can look at something and say, it's not just an elite track and field athlete who can do this, but if an 80-year-old can do it and she's now being shared on your Instagram page,
Mm.
how bad could it be for me to try it? And maybe it'll stop me from like busting my Achilles next time I go play pickup basketball.
Exactly, exactly. And I actually think that people are way closer to being able to do things than they actually assume they are. Um, I think that we do like to wrap people in cotton wool a little too quickly. Um, you know,
Yep.
anyone between the ages, honestly, of 30 and 55, we are pretty quick to be like, these are plyometrics. They're not ready for this stuff. And I think that as soon as you put that barrier put that barrier up in front of someone, then it feels like this thing that's like so far away. It's like doing a full snatch. It's like, oh, we
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. So we need to break down all of these derivatives. And then one day you'll eventually get there and you'll be able to put 100 pounds on the bar. But
Yeah.
like, but it seems like this, um, this unicorn that not everyone is ever going to get to. And I've just never seen that, because I always saw that Eric was like, right, here's some form of landing and takeoff. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't care if it looks plyometric. Your job is to eventually make it look plyometric. And your job is to probably be faster on the ground. And your job is probably to be able to jump higher, farther, or whatever. Like, that's always the common theme for everyone ever that's been coached. It's like, be faster on the ground, jump further, or jump higher. There is always more to that outcome goal. And it doesn't matter if there is a time frame that you must hit for it to be deemed as plyometric, because ultimately, if you can't hit that time frame, then you're still going to get the stimulus that we're looking to achieve. Because like you say, you're leaning into the novelty. Like, if you have not landed and taken off in one smooth action in 15 years, doing a bunch of that, no matter how fast or slow, is still going to give you a stimulus because you haven't done it. So like, your job is to ultimately speed that up and increase how much force you put into that movement. And yeah, barriers to entry have just been so, like, everyone's so intimidated by it. And I'm like, you just need a system. And that system can be so stupidly simple, like the one that I use, which is, again, is from Eric, who took it from Zoltan, his coach in the 70s. And if you have a system and you have a way in, then it's accessible for everyone, in my opinion, because I've seen it.
Yeah. Also, the system, the fact that it has originated from someone named Zoltan. I don't know if that's a Balkan name, but it sounds like it. +5 credibility, just for that name drop. That's like, it's like Verkhoshansky.
Sounds more anabolic, doesn't
it? yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're like, is that the one where they front squat for max reps and then sprint 400 meters? Yeah. No, close enough. No, that's really cool. I like your point. The other fun thing has been seeing how this has evolved alongside the sort of like anti-fragile mindset, which has been really great for me. It's been really fascinating to see people start to come to the realization that you're talking about, which is you don't need to do it perfectly to get stimulus. Eventually, if you repeat it, it will improve as long as you're repeating it with intention, right?
Yep.
And eventually you'll be able to tap in to the stimulus that you're looking for, whether that's, speed, power, etc. And you're probably not going to break in the meantime. And for me, I've been coaching parkour since 2010, and I have worked with kids from age 4 all the way up to adults in their 70s and 80s. And very early on, you realize, like, people in their 50s and 60s, if they take 5 to 10 minutes to just kind of learn how to land and get comfortable moving through that basic range of motion, getting their brain used to seeing something come at them, the ground, and then having to kind of react to that physical object and learn how to take that impact. I had 60-year-old women taking 3 or 4 foot drops comfortably and doing it probably 40 or 50 times in their second or third parkour session, just vaulting down off of like chest high walls. And when you then transition from that and you look at more of the sort of accepted modalities, there's a lot of people who would just say, like, that is absolutely an accident way to happen. And obviously things can go wrong, but going back to the sort of CrossFit space and seeing now with the spread of the internet, people do crazy stuff all over the place. But what you realize is that a lot of times the injury rate or the rate of failure is a lot lower than maybe people would anticipate in this like fearful state.
Well, and like you play two sides of the coin. You play the safe route that people normally just fall out of doing because it's too safe, or
too boring,
or too boring. Or you chase fun. Like, people are turning up to a parkour session in their 60s because they want to feel youthful. They want to feel like a badass because they haven't felt like that in a long time. Like, yeah, I can vault and fall down from 3 or 4 feet and land. And I can do it multiple times. And you know what? I'm willing to risk. And I know that there's risk. I'm not stupid. I'm at a stage in my life where I can understand how I mitigate risk. and my body won't let me do it and my brain won't let me do it if I felt like it was too much of a risk. But I know that there's always that little bit in the back of my mind, but also screw that, this is fun and I want to push my body. And a lot of people
Yeah.
want that challenge in their life. So it's that age old thing of like, you know, I see it with my daughter, like she's 4 years old, take her to soccer practice. And I'm like, she's not going to last in this soccer practice because these kids aren't stimulated in the way that they should be. I take her to gymnastics and everything is challenging. And then at every moment that she gets back from gymnastics, the next 2, 3, 4 days, it's like, I want to learn how to do this. Let me try this. Let me try this. And she will do it with zero like push from me. It's all self-motivation to like beat myself at this challenge and get better. And there's always the risk there, but we love to challenge that. So I think about plyometrics and dynamic movement in the same way. Like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I have a
There's a lot of
question.
risk.
Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
No, you're good. You're good.
I was just going to ask you about going to that point about your daughter. In the case of plyometrics, do you feel like skill acquisition, the sort of like learning curve of skill acquisition in plyometrics, is a strength or a weakness?
In terms of if you're trying to learn it,
If you're trying to learn it, I guess, but like, because what I'm thinking is hearing your daughter's story. As adults, I think it's easy for us. You have limited time. You know, there's kind of this general like, well, I don't want to put a ton of effort into something where there's a high barrier to entry or a high learning curve. But at the same time, a lot of those skills that do take that effort to learn end up being the most engaging and end up being the ones that people stick with. So I'm curious, from all the training that you've done with people, do you feel like that the skill acquisition, once people get past maybe the fear of it, has been a benefit, or do you feel like it's been more of something that people have to work through?
it's the biggest benefit of it all, because people have like, in the first year of training dynamic movement and plyometrics, every like 8 to 12 weeks, you have like this aha breakthrough. Like, I can do this. Like, or like they hit a takeoff and they like over rotate because they stick it and like create this massive, but they're like, whoa. And I'm like, there it is. That's it. Like, continue to create that feeling and sensation. That shows me that you're learning how to deal with more force in a faster time frame, and you're creating more braking force because of that, and it is like slingshotting you and catapulting you into the air. And in the first year there is a continued sensation. Like Eric used to say to me, he's like, once you tasted flight, that's it. So that's all you need to do, right? It's the same for you guys, right? I can imagine you're doing a massive vault or a Kong, and like once you feel that sensation of hitting the top of it, and you're like, oh, that feels amazing. Like, let me go back and let me give it more speed. Let me run harder at this. Let me just get this sensation of just really pushing hard into it, and then just having that moment of free fall of like, oh, this feels good. Yeah, it's the same with high jump. It's an addictive feeling.
That's fantastic. Do you have a movement pattern that you see people really respond well to? Because for me, it's like doing bounds, that feeling when you're kind of just like chambered mid bound,
Yep.
and you feel like you're about to fall, but your speeds are just continuing to carry you through the air.
Yep.
When you figure out how to hold that position, it feels amazing. Or like I see you program a lot the running, I don't know what the actual term is, the sort of like running Mario skips or like hops that folks do.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you see people really like tap into, or like, yes,
Yeah.
that is the feeling?
I think they all tend to be very kind of locomotive. Again, it's why the industry fails people, is because everything is on the spot and everything is very up and down, and it's like keep people safe here. And I'm like, yeah, but you need to give people the sensations of like, oh, this feels great, and bounding, like you say, one leg to the other, like floating, like treat yourself as if you're walking on the moon, like get that feeling into your body. And then, like you say, gallops and skips can often be, they're like, the first time you get someone to skip when they're in their 60s, it's like they have this like childlike like laughter about it, and it almost becomes humorous. But once you can get into like a gallop of like a 1-2, 1-2, we kind of try and float between, when you hit that 1-2 and take off, that moment in the air, you're like, whoa, then you go 1-2 and hit it again. People love those sensations. So I'll always have those in for people. We start it, you can start it really, really easily, and it can be super rudimentary. And then it's about like, give me some more. Let me see you hit the ground a little bit more with a little bit of volition. And they're like, I can actually put a little bit more into this. And straight away they start to get those sensations, and it's like, cool, this is easy for me now. Like we can just chase those sensations, and they'll go with it and continue to come back to want to do it.
Yeah, that's absolutely what I see people experience as well. It's that feeling of being in the air, and like you said, you want to give people enough leeway to feel like they can make a mistake, but then obviously your job as the coach is to try and create a space where there are as few variables out there for them to make that mistake as possible. Like if I'm having, again, like a 60-year-old woman take a 4-foot drop, it's because we've worked all the positions that are involved in that dynamic movement in isolation. And you're like, okay, I know that you can hit every single one of these positions, and that on a neuromuscular level, you're ready to put them all together and take this kind of impact. But now I need to let you feel this sense of like a little bit out of control. You're not actually out of control, but you just want to
Yep.
feel that so that it really sticks, and you get that full experience. I want to ask you, when you were working with Tim Champion, so I got to do the program that you guys had worked on. I worked on
Yep.
that one for 6 weeks. It was so fun.
Good.
What was that experience like for you, I guess, and what were you surprised by working with him, other than that he's just an absolute unit? What surprised you, and where did you feel like maybe he got the most out of the program?
So a big thing for me that I continue to it feeds into almost like plyometrics and jumping and like repetitive jumping being like the first level to where I see like, the parkour like performance pyramid. If Tim doing something that's insanely athletic is at the top, plyometrics is on that. I see that it's kind of on that pathway towards doing some of those movements. And for me, it was very much having unbelievable awareness of yourself in space, in the air. And I always say this to people, like when you're starting out or you haven't done something in 20 years or 10 years, the bit that you don't like is flight. So once you are airborne, everything tenses up. Like you've been through it from starting things out to now. Probably you'll do a skill that you haven't done in a while, or you're doing something you've never done. Maybe you're jumping over a gap, whatever it might be. There's going to be a moment where you go in and you try it first time, and you kind of like freeze up at it, or something slows down, or something kind of puts the brakes on a little bit. Whereas there's a lot of proprioceptive awareness and anticipative control that he had that I was like, oh, this is a whole other level. And not only did he have it with locomoting on the ground, but he had it also on bars, which I was like blown away by. And we had the chance to go down to Santa Monica, and he got on the bars there, and
Nice.
And it was pretty impressive in terms of how he sequenced and put things together. Now, to your parkour listeners, that might be a natural process that everyone goes through. But for someone that's an outsider, that's not happening in a lot of other sports, especially coming from a sport that isn't organized, which I find even more fascinating, because I think a lot of organized sports need to take more from that book, because everything in terms of how he was putting things together, operationally, he's like, okay, I can do this. I know that I can jump this far or swing this far or take this much speed in. Cool, I can figure that out. But then he was solving things with his brain, like how he's going to execute something skill-wise and neuromuscularly. He's like, I know when I do this, I'm going to have to relax to then get ready to catch again. Like, for example, when he was catching, he was doing like he would swing down to swing over the top of one pole to then catch again. And like
Oh yeah.
I related that back to a landing, but with his hands and his grip. So it was
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to kind of see how not only does he have to navigate what was going on in the air, but he then has to anticipate what's about to happen. And these are all the same processes that happen with our feet when we do plyometrics. So it just felt like everything was just kind of turned up a level to being like, oh wow, there's like, you're taking this much more speed in, this much more force, this much more velocity. When we got to doing like crude movements in a gym when we jumped around, I was probably quite close to how he moved.
Mm-hmm.
Then you put him into an environment where there's complexity, and I was like, oh wow, you can do this here. Like my
Yeah.
power and intensity drops by like 80%, and I'm like, I don't want to. And he was like, you just have to understand that feeling of proprioception and spatial awareness. But you know, when you put your foot in the ground hard, or when you take speed into something, you're just navigating the world slightly differently as to what you would do. I was a high jumper. So like my job was to
Mm-hmm.
run hard and fast, whip round a turn, and stick my leg in the ground and just hope for the best. Like I'm sure there's some times in parkour where you do a few of those.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, that was the first like standout point where I was like, wow.
Yeah. That's really cool. The bar example is great. I've seen you talk a little bit about sort of what what your tier system would even look like for upper body. There's a
Mm.
parkour athlete named Chris Scott
Hmm.
who had a viral post. Yeah, he's done some upper body plyometric work. Bars are interesting because to me, they're almost like a wheel sport, like an action sport with wheels because you can rotate
Yeah.
around the object. So you're able to take that force and instead of having to redirect it, like you can just use centripetal force and whip around the bar and eliminate a lot of it that way. Um, but it's also so much more of a finesse situation. And my next thing that I was curious about asking you, I got to be on Austin Yoakum's podcast last year and chatted with him a bit about a lot of the sort of like play parkour derived stuff that he's doing in warm-ups.
Mm.
And I'm seeing a little bit more of that start to pop up. And because you've gotten the chance to work with Tim and because you are so knowledgeable about the actual stimulus that athletes are getting from plyometrics, I'm curious
Mm.
what your take on is on the difference between what maybe coaches look at as their plyometric training and what
Yeah.
they look at as sort of a play or parkour training. Because for me, I have a few takes, but I'm curious what you see the difference in intent and perceived stimulus being.
Yeah. So I think you can kind of look at it in there's I think they both sit on two sides. I think you have your clinical practice of plyometrics where our job is to only focus really on the intent and sequences behind what we're trying to achieve. So you come in with a goal and orientation of where you want to take that movement, whether it is to be more reactive, whether it is to push for more height and really deliver more output, whether it's to, you know, fall from a higher height and to deal with higher eccentric load or landing loads.
Mm-hmm.
So I would see that as more of a clinical, like it's almost like lifting weights. This is a strength component. We're coming in to overload you with strength in a certain range of motion. Whereas play, so whether you're using movements that are, it can be game based, it can be, for me it's problem solving with autonomy. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it falls in the same sort of conversation of people will say that basketball delivers enough plyometric training, but we know that in basketball, we have the data in things like college basketball that less than 4% of basketball is jumping. So although something looks a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to give you the stimulus of that clinical way to look at it. Whereas the play side of thing is solving a lot of other problems. It is doing a lot of, like I said, for number one, it's the subconscious, like, let your body problem solve. And in doing so, there's going to be economy of movement built into that, efficiency. Can I get it? I don't care how I catch this. I don't care about the positions I'm in or the speed in which I have to get in and out of it. If my job is to, I don't know, catch and react to it, or react and catch a ball, I'm not going to try and make it a plyometric. I'm just going to do the problem solving itself. So there might be a lot of spike ball games, and people are saying, oh, there's lots of change of direction in this. And you're like, great. If we actually zoom in, does this compare to doing highly reactive, like side to side, super stiff plyometrics on 2 feet or 1 foot? Probably not. But that doesn't mean that there's not a place for it. So that's kind of how I'll look at it. I'll look at if one side is clinical, the other is play. It is achieving a problem solving scenario, whether it's game based, whether it is, solve this problem with your body. I want you to go from this tall position to this low position, or I want you to find this movement flow. I think a lot of, like I said before, efficiency and economy creeps into that conversation. And it's the same with the basketball conversation. It's like there's very few plyometric per se landings in basketball that are very typical up and down. And it's because of the efficiency and economy that you need in a game of basketball where your job is to play for 48 minutes. And there is a constant flow of movement. So like, no, you can't jump as high as you possibly can and be as reactive as you possibly can for every single movement that happens. No, you have to be economical. You have to exert the least amount of force that is needed to get the job done. Right? Yeah. So it's the same with playing games. Like, I don't really want to send it here. I'm just going to beat this guy. Or like you send it to a certain level and you're like, oh shit, this guy's faster than me. I've got to really try and stay close to him at least. Then you might get that exposure, but it's not guaranteed. So that's kind of how I look at those two. They're not necessarily opposing. I think that they're very much more complementary than we think.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And I'll say for the listener who has maybe not experimented with your programming, other than definitely try it. I think parkour athletes, to your point with basketball, a lot of times we think we get enough exposure to plyometric training in our sport. Depending on how you train, I think that can be possible. But parkour is so technically bounded, as you kind of said with Tim, right? The sort of environmental conditions determine your training more than anything else. And so your opportunity to genuinely express full power, going out to a track and just hitting a triple broad jump for distance without having to worry about if you're landing on a rail or a slippery wall or any of the other environmental factors are actually pretty rare. And I also think one great thing that I really enjoyed about your programming is the just like the light volume accumulation. Not just the deep tier stuff, but just the really minimal, do some hops, do some alternating leg stuff, and build up 100 or 150 landings in a session at 30%. That really helped me a ton because in parkour, once you get to a certain level, again, you're kind of pushing this sort of like technical proficiency and power scaling. it ends up being like an anime. It's like by the end of it, the power scaling is so absurd that you're going out and you're just like, okay, everything here is 95% of my physical capacity or higher. And you're not spending time working in that 30 to 50% volume. And I remember I chatted with Tim about his experience of the program, and he said for him that was the biggest benefit, was just like having an excuse to go out on an off day and just like stay fresh and do some light plyometrics. Do you feel like that's been consistent with a lot of the athletes that you work with?
100%. I think going back to the like, oh, we just use the sport to do the job. There's so much that, I mean, I kind of look at it. It's like, number one, I think you have to go away and develop the output capacity, because like you say, if everything that you do and you turn up to feels like 95% and above, like you have to have this like reserve where you can almost every movement that everyone's doing, as let's say you're doing it with a group of you, if all those movements feel at 70%, you are going to be so much better suited to continually do and execute that skill for way longer than the guy next to you that's performing at 90% for each of those skills. So that's a big thing. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
aren't powerful enough to make sure that you can execute these movements, then you're just going to have to do it at a much lesser degree to get the volume of that skill in. It's that
Mm-hmm.
simple. So you've got to go beyond the demands of what you want to achieve. And sometimes you have to do it in a clinical environment. Like for you to jump as high as you can, as reactively as you can, or jump as far as you can, you can't do it with, like you say, ledges and landing on poles. And, maybe it's just the case that you can't do it on concrete. Like go and do it
Mm-hmm.
on an environment that feels a little safer to absolutely slam your foot in the ground. Maybe you feel good to do that, but I think that's super important. The reactive stuff, like you say, is you're probably like the lighter, easier stuff is I think is so much better suited to, like you say, to do separately from that parkour environment, because I think a lot of what you guys do, because of the skills, number one, but number two, I think that there's just so much longer contacts in parkour than you actually think. I think some of the
Mm-hmm.
fastest contacts you'll get is probably when you're running into things. But other than
Mm-hmm.
that, it's really tough. It's like when you're doing, what's the skill called when you're bound over something? Like you'll put your foot on like a ledge and then it's like continual
Yeah.
bounding. What do you call that?
Strides. Just
Strides.
yes. Mm-hmm.
So like people assume that strides are fast, and if you actually were to break it down, they're probably pretty slow. So if you're going from ledge to ledge to ledge, there's certain people actually change technically, and I've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that in Tim. Like I've seen Tim bound for distance from one leg to the other just on flat ground, and then I've seen him
Yeah.
stride in an environment where there are much more heightened skills involved. The actual mechanics of it change, like how he swings his leg, because there are skills involved there where, okay, I have to make sure that my foot's stable on that surface. I might also add a little bit of like braking and slowing down force just to
Mm-hmm.
steer better. So like there's so many other components where you want to be able to, like I said, you want to be able to raise the ceiling of how much force and how far you can stride. That's great. So I can come back and work on that skill. But also with that, you obviously you have to have the skill in the first place to be able to exert that force. Like I could probably put myself in most striding scenarios that people have done, that people are like, oh, this is massive. But like for me to do it, I don't have the skill capacity to trust putting my foot down like that. So
Yes.
you got to do the work of the skill stuff to trust that you can, like ultimately the people that will stride the best will be closer to the clinical forms of bounding than the person that's not good at the skill. So like you
Yeah.
have to have this to and fro of, I need to work on that skill of doing the strides, but I also need to go away and do the bounding on flat ground. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but it's just some of my thoughts in
Yeah.
terms of I really do see that there's a lot of benefit stepping away from the environment, but because I just see that there's so many skills that slow down the movement that won't necessarily train the qualities. They will to a degree, but I think there's a diminishing return.
100%. I hoped you agreed with me, and then you did. I have a very similar perspective where you're trying to raise your physical ceiling all of the time so that you can tap into as much of your technical potential as you can. I was lucky that one of my early training partners out here in Colorado actually is his name John Reynolds. He set the Colorado state record in high school and at Air Force Academy for triple jump. And he started as a
Mm.
parkour athlete and then transitioned into
Oh,
triple jump.
that's
Yeah.
dope.
And so getting to train with him, it's wild because in a triple jump scenario, he's out jumping me by like 3 to 5 meters every
Yeah.
time easily, right? Like no question. But in a technical scenario, we're within like 6 to 12 inches generally, because my ability to max out and carry like a technique that works for any sort of scenario in
Mm.
parkour is a lot closer to my physical potential, and his technical level is like 70% of his physical potential.
Yeah.
uh, and I think a lot of people who maybe are listening that are parkour athletes see the value in creating a clinical lab to work on ultimate strength, right? They're like, absolute strength, I understand why I need to do that here, I get why I'm not getting that in my sport. But I think fewer parkour athletes, and this is changing, maybe see where the benefit is in having a extreme track and field day, as I used to call it, where I just like go out to the field and you're working on your reactivity, stiffness, all of the plyometric qualities in isolation without the technical variables that parkour introduces, so that you can then find your individual right balance of like, okay, ideally, this is my bound technique. I'm maximizing total output using this technique. Now, what do I need to change in case I'm doing that, but dropping 2 feet or going up 2 or 3 feet to a ledge or going down to a rail or going,
Yeah.
and then being able to take in all those variables. I also wanted to go back. So I thought you did a great job breaking down the sort of difference between play and plyometrics. My pet peeve recently has been seeing certain um, I think part of it is because the parkour community has been pushing this narrative that like parkour is a great substitute for plyometrics. I think actually a good parkour coach who's working with a non parkour population, whether they're athlete like professional athletes or sort of more gem pop, what you had mentioned about your experience working with Tim is where I see parkour actually having value, because it is inherently technical and it is inherently situational. I see the benefit being really complementary to plyometric training, where you're taking some of those skills, but what you're actually learning is how to adapt them in like a dual task environment, which will then help you probably in a more sport specific scenario, to a certain extent. And for somebody like Tim, you're learning the skill of, it's like proprioception, but in the broadest sense, because I think proprioception can kind of be like, oh, what are we talking about here?
Mm.
Learning where your feet in particular and your hands are when you can't see them in relation to your body. And I think that, yeah, I was just curious where you had seen that, because I've seen a lot of the people and like, we're gonna do hurdles or we're gonna do like parkour vaults and it's gonna sub for our plyometric training. And to me that feels, I'm glad people are doing it. I appreciate that it's getting some attention. But I'm like, what is the stimulus that you're aiming for here with your athletes? Because if you want them to be more explosive, that's probably not the most helpful. But if you want your athletes to, let's say, be coming down from a jump ball and give their body a chance to sort of adapt to like, oh, I feel myself landing on somebody's foot, how can I now move with this momentum in a bunch of different ways? Or
Yeah.
I'm suddenly jumping from a compromised position that I'm not used to, but I've been exposed to a lot of different environmental stimulus through this other type of training. Like that's where I see parkour kind of shining in a uh, cross training space.
Yeah, yeah. I think it speaks very closely to um, a strange kind of argument that I was having with a couple of people before, and it was this idea that um, you didn't need to train landing mechanics, and I think it related very closely to, because like they were showing an example of someone coming down from dunking a basketball, and then you see the resultant parabola after they've come down from, they've flushed the ball through the hoop and
Mm-hmm.
now they're on the descent down to hit the ground. Most of the time, the guys have turned, they're doing a kind of 180 to look back down the court because they probably have to get up and run back that way. And that was used as the example. But ultimately, if you're having the conversation about plyometrics, there should be a form of organizing our body in the best way possible to achieve the best outcome of, number one, stimulating our tissue to the nth degree with super fast, high overload based movements. And that goes back to our kind of clinical idea, whereas landings just landing. So like plyometrics is a
Hmm.
landing and takeoff based outcome measure. We're looking at the landing, but we also want to see how it dictates the takeoff. But purely just landing and organizing our bodies in space to maybe get up and back down a court as fast as possible and not be out of the game for 5 to 10 seconds, or to, like you say, orientate our bodies out of the way of other players. That's kind of where I see this play idea of parkour versus the clinical side of plyometrics, and saying, we have different tasks to solve, and I think the parkour side is problem solving in the air subconsciously, and knowing
Hmm.
the space that we're traveling in, because I think a lot of like super catastrophic injuries are happening as a result of, we saw Paul George put his foot down on the base of the hoop that time, and you see
Yeah.
crazy fractures because of that. Would someone that had a greater background in parkour maybe orientate themselves a bit better to get out of the way of that? Maybe they wouldn't, but at the same time, I don't think there's a problem with learning that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's I think you're kind of speaking exactly to kind of how I see that, because there is no right or wrong way to land either, and I'm a big advocate for that. Again, I think it relates back to efficiency, economy of movement. No one wants to land in like a classic snap down position as they come off a dunk when they jump off of one leg. Like when you jump off of one leg, your body's going to move to the side of the hoop. You're going to flush it with one hand.
Hmm.
That's going to start to spin you as well in the air. Then what you're going to do, you're going to come down on that same takeoff leg, or maybe it rotates and you switch onto the other leg. And then I'm going 1-2 to slow down that momentum. This is all the stuff that you guys do. You
Yep.
understand how to disperse force. Like, I don't want to stick a heavy landing because we apparently think that's more safe. Even if it is in a deeper range of motion and trying to, like, we're per se dispersing force. No, I think the best way that our bodies do that is they just naturally flow out of that.
Hmm.
But I don't think that that's necessarily we know how we're going to stimulate the body in a plyometric sense. Like if I want a really highly reactive, high stim form of plyometric, we can't have much joint flexion, and it's got to be done as rapidly as possible. Or if we're looking for more of the depth jump vibe of things, then it's about inducing a
Hmm.
lot of load, and it can be done where we're trying to push a lot out of the takeoff, which can lead
Yeah.
to a deeper joint range. So anyway, I'm rambling on about that stuff, but that's kind of how I see it. And I think it's very related to kind of how you do.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the landing part because this is something that I've been thinking about more and more as uh, I think parkour it's interesting because it feels like it's aging out of where it's been. It's not quite an action sport, and it's not
Mm,
quite doesn't quite fit into athletics because it is self-guided like an action sport, but you're using your body in the way that I think traditional athletics does. And I think there's a lot of interesting potential. I actually think that looking at certain aspects of parkour training as this like clinical lab environment to work on eccentric landing, just like that, the process of landing and absorbing in a variety of positions. I also think it's good that you say there's not, I think I agree with this very strongly with maybe like a caveat if there's not a right or wrong way to land. I think maybe like people can find ways to land that are potentially a lot more damaging, and I think there's ways that you can develop patterns that are probably going to be more applicable across a variety
mm,
of situations. But there's not a lot of folks that, like you said with plyometrics, right? The goal isn't to land and absorb, right? The goal is to get off the ground as quickly as possible. That's the
mm,
stimulus that we're chasing, then the adaptation that we're chasing. And in parkour, it does present you with a more interesting and I think variable way to train pure eccentric landing as a skill, and not just in a way it's like, okay, jump off this 36-inch box, do that 20 times. Your athlete is not going to have a very fun time with that, but if you're giving them something to land on, you're able to change the angle of that thing that they're landing on, and you're able to then put that at the end of a more dynamic route or challenge, or you're having them jump off of their hands like they would in a Kong, or swing off of a bar where they can't necessarily see their feet. You're able to scale in some of those variables that you're going to be dealing with in a sport specific scenario, and give them the chance to, like, yeah, maybe you still land on the hoop, but your feet are used to having things under them that you can't see, and instead of trying to resist that sudden feeling, your body just goes down to your hip and you kind of slam into the hoop, but you didn't tear your ACL or you didn't break your leg. um, it's an interesting space. I don't think a lot of people are exploring it yet, but I'm glad you
Mm.
brought that up, because I was curious.
Yeah,
I
and do you know
think
what?
that in this part, in the parkour space, I'm sorry, I
Oh
was
yeah.
just gonna say, in our parkour space, we talk about a lot of stuff, but it's kind of the classic, like, you see yourself in a certain way, and then you're like, oh,
Mm.
how does everybody else perceive this?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's those discussions that you need to start having online, right? You just start to put it into the ether, and people are like, "Oh, I was thinking that," or "I don't think that at all." So it's like you
Hmm.
start to. It's the public kind of soapbox back in the day where you, you would have stood up and said something, and you would have either got, you know, dragged away, or people
Yeah,
would have been chanting. So
the
I
landing elixir.
yeah. I don't. Do you know what's interesting is like, even if you assume like force wise and distribution of force,
Hmm.
that generically that's better for people, what people fall short on is how different that is for different body types. So like if I've got super long femurs, or you've got super long shins, like I've got quite a big long torso, so I'm
Hmm.
probably going to squat into a lot more than someone like, I mean, I follow Lambo and I watch him fall from these
Yeah.
crazy heights, and he hip hinges, and people would have been like, that's going to be terrible on X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And I am an
His
advocate
back
of,
is, he's got no vertebrae
yeah,
left. Look at those
right.
jelly discs. Yeah.
But what I think it does is it very much suits him, and him in that given scenario. So that's also a big thing, is we go back to, we're always trying to fight how our brain is problem solving in that given moment and scenario. If I've got knee pain, no matter who I am at any given scenario, what I'm probably going to do is problem solve around that knee pain. So if it means me hip hinging more for that given movement, then that's probably the best for it, right?
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
have done a lot in track and field where you know that in order, like, let's say I've got a pain in something, but
Hmm.
I need to clear a bar in high jump. A good example was lateral bone bruising on my ankle. I knew that if I come in and I'm super precise, I'm probably going to lose a lot of output. So I just come in and stick my foot in the ground, and my body, let my body problem solve the best. Sometimes I land in the pit and I'm like, huh, I'm free. I made it through. Sometimes you hit it and you still clear a bar, but you land in the pit and you're like, that hurt. That hurt a lot. And I'll have to go and lick my wounds a little bit. But like, that's not parkour. Like, there's not the exact same thing over and over again. Even when you go to that different
Hmm.
environment every time, you're coming with different, whether it is something psychological or something physical. This time you
Hmm.
have an ankle stiffness that you didn't have before. Next time you'll have knee pain. So like, landings are inherently a subconscious thing that is, you know, it is going to do whatever it chooses to do. Like, your brain is going to choose what it wants to do in that given moment. You
Hmm.
can try and fight it sometimes, but most of the time something is at a detriment because you're trying to do that. So like,
Yeah.
when you
No, I
guys
think.
stick a landing, that's always a thing. Let's say you try to stick the landing, but this time I want to bend my knees more. You're probably going to topple over and lose balance. Where it's
Hmm.
like the skill doesn't care about your ankle pain or knee pain. The skill just needs to be
Yeah.
executed.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's a good framing of it for sure. And I guess I see landings in that way, similar like we were talking about raising your ceiling in the context of bounds. I think that's kind of where the isolation work on landing and exposing people to maybe more impact in whatever the scenario is, whether it's probably not going in for a 5 meter drop like Lambo onto concrete, but taking somebody to a space and having them drop from 3 or 4 feet and learning to mitigate that force with their specific mechanics in a way that when the outcome that you're looking for is like, was that comfortable? Did it feel repeatable? Do we notice any insanely weird tracking mechanisms that maybe popped up? Because that people can get obsessed with that. If the other two things are on and there's some interesting tracking, it's like maybe keep an eye on it, but probably it's fine. That's where you're like raising your ceiling so that when you're doing the 70%, you have enough of a template that when your ankle is impinged and now you're suddenly taking 70% of the force on your left leg because your right leg doesn't have the dorsiflexion that it usually has, it's fine. It's within your sort of like acceptable range of movement because you've built that template out. This actually is a good place to transition if you've got a little bit more time. I had a couple great questions from parkour athletes.
Yeah.
This one was like one of my favorite ones for you. It was, is there a difference or do you program differently for plyometrics when you're training men versus women?
There definitely can be. It often can be the case that we do a lot more volume for women that is maybe slightly less intense. Some women can handle more intense stuff, but a lot of women do better with a greater volume of more sub-maximal stuff. So not like flat out, but like just a little bit below maximal. I learned this very much from Eric, and he spoke a little more to the hormonal responses of women and men in terms of, due to an increase of testosterone in men, you tend to be able to deal with higher forces and more of that. Whereas I think there's something in an increased estrogen in females that does a lot with the harder tissues like your tendons. Don't quote me on that, but that's something that I starkly remember speaking to Eric about a long time ago. And it's always served me really well because when I've had a lot of like, you hear it in track and field, and I like absolutely despise it. It's like if women want to jump as high as men, then they need to train like men. And I think it's just the most bigoted thing to say possible. And it kind of pees me off. And I'm like, I'll never say that a woman isn't as good as a man per se. They are just very different in terms, they have different hormones. So like, therefore there is a requirement for a different form of training. And believe me, I've had plenty of female athletes that have ran it close with the guys, and they are special human beings. So like, that's kind of how I've always seen it. I'll see that you can still get a very similar outcome, but I think that there's just different ways around that. So volume is always going to be key. I also think that sometimes I think women prefer to be doing higher volumes of submaximal stuff, whereas men just like to grunt and send everything. And so we have that stupid tendency in us. We're far closer to an ape than women are. They're far more intelligent than us and can emotionally regulate far better than we can. We just have no idea. And I also think to some degree that's also a detriment to a lot of guys as well. So I think there's also a spectrum of men where if you're like one of those kind of very wiry guys, just super slender and wiry, I think the high volumes of high intense work is not also preferable for you. I'm not going to say that you're more like a woman. I don't want to hurt your feelings there, but I just think that
if
your
my
body
listener can't handle that at this point, that's on them.
Then that's on them,
right?
right?
If you're a wiry boy like me, you are more effeminate. That's okay. Just embrace it. Get on some tests if you need to do that to feel better. No.
But yeah, I just think that I think it's very much been a case for someone like myself in track and field that when you do a lot of very heavy lifting and a lot of like kind of grunt work, it just doesn't suit well to keeping that reactive snap in you. I think you need to just have a lot more reactive stuff in your training that serves well. And then the strength work is like an injury prevention supportive thing. Whereas people that are maybe just a little, I'm 6'3", and like when I was a high jumper, I weighed 165 pounds. So like you understand how slender I was, right? But if you're 5'10" and you weigh 200 pounds, you're like a meatball to me. Like I'm a stick and you're like, it's just two different things. So like you're probably gonna benefit a lot more from more like naturally heavier explosive or heavier strength based stuff. So there is a spectrum for that, and I think that's the same for women as well. You are going to get the wiry high jumper looking female that's 6 foot and like you say weighs 135 pounds or something crazy, but you're also going to have more stout women that are way more powerful. So yeah, I think that's
the CrossFit build.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, someone like myself is never ever going to be able to CrossFit because I have a long torso and I'm 6'3". So like, it's just never. Like, I'm never going to be able to snatch repeatedly.
Yeah,
it's just not for me. But get me bouncing, then I'm gonna win most things. So it's I think you definitely have to just adjust it. Everyone's going to do high volume stuff. Everyone's going to do high intense stuff, but it's just more of some of the other.
Yeah, that also checks out. I know, I'm not sure what the current state of the research is, but I know that there's been quite a lot of research into just like proportionate tendon, like recurring tendon injuries in men versus women, and that there seems to be some indications that women are more prevalent or more likely to potentially receive like recurring like various tendon issues and ligament issues. And if we're giving them the lower intensity, high volume tendon dosing, that's kind of like doubling up on safety and efficacy, one can hope. That was from Georgia Clark, who's a coach in London. She coaches, awesome. She actually just ran the FemGaps women's parkour jam out there, which was pretty rad.
That's awesome.
Got another question, which is, how do you balance the role of sprinting in plyometric training?
So if you're a parkour athlete or coach that's listening to this, I would look at it in two ways. You're going to have your acceleration stuff, which is something that is critical in what you do. You already probably do quite a lot of accelerating. I guess it's the clinical setting versus the play setting. Most of how you accelerate is like, cool, you've got 4 steps or you've got 3 steps.
Yes.
Like,
it's definitely submaximal. Yeah.
So it's about how do I induce higher acceleration speeds and intensities, which you're probably going to need around 20, 25 yards, 20 meters, 25 meters. That's going to give you pure acceleration. So exposure to higher speeds with pure accelerating efforts. And again, if you are out on the streets and you don't have a space that is like 40 yards just out in front of you because you're on a street, like it's embarrassing to not say that you can't do this stuff. You could literally use this, like move a little bit, warm up, and then just do 5 high acceleration efforts over like 20 yards, 20 meters. That's good acceleration training. It is that stupidly simple. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, you can start to use weighted versions of that or resisted versions where you're doing some sled work or you're pushing a prowler. Most of the time you're going to want to, honestly, you don't want that load to be over 20% of what you weigh. So if you weigh 200 pounds, then 40 pounds is probably where you're going to max out. So that's important. If you want to maximize your accelerating capacity, don't be pushing 200-pound sleds. It's just, it's going to have a very diminishing return. You might as well just do strength training at that point. And then you've got max velocity stuff. So it is when you can create your highest speeds out of any way that you run. And most of the time that is in building up an acceleration and then being at your highest speeds. Again, most of your guys aren't going to have a track background. So you're probably going to hit max speed at like 30, maybe not even, I'm lying to you. It's probably going to be about 20 to 30 yards. That's probably where you're going to hit that. So you know what? Let's say you're out on a street, Do you want to know how you mark 20 yards or 20 meters? Just do 20 long steps. There you go. Cool. Put a hat down there. This is my starting mark, is this lamppost. Cool. Well, I'm going to mark another 10 or 15 past that 20 or 30 yard marker. I'm going to build up into that. We're going to start to build, get faster and faster and faster. And when you hit that first marker, you are then going to make sure that you are at your fastest. Don't feel like you're accelerating through it. You just need to hold a speed. This isn't going to, it's not necessarily going to have a specific skill relevance to what you guys do, because you're probably not going to ever run that far or need to touch max speed. Mm-hmm. But the stimulus that comes from max speed cannot be replicated in anything. In anything. Turning your wheels 100%. Over at the fastest rate your body can possibly handle and getting your foot on and off the ground faster than anything that you do in anything. It doesn't matter whether you're jumping rope or whether you are doing a form of jumping in parkour. You're not going to replicate it. It is twice as fast as you blink your eye. If you're doing that, that is going to be a very high neuromuscular demanding form of training. Again, you don't need a lot of it. If you're doing more than 5, you are overtraining it. And that should almost be the same with your acceleration. Use the number 5. I'm going to do 5 20s, or I'm going to do 3 10s and then 2 20s. Like, that's it. For all you parkour listeners, you don't need to do any more than 5 reps. Job done. You do an acceleration session one day, you do a max velocity session another day, and you do it at the same time you're about to do some parkour stuff. You use it to get ready for your parkour. And I can guarantee you'll feel improvements in your parkour movements in terms of your explosiveness. That 3 strides where you're thinking, I've only got 3 strides to achieve this huge movement. Yeah, those 3 strides are going to be better.
100%. There's also I'll just say anecdotally, using it as a warm-up or as kind of a part of your warm-up or your session, in session and sort of like across a variety of sessions, the neurological adaptation that happens at speed, if you're never reaching maximum speed and you're always working at 70 or 80, like if you're running into a Kong, and maybe someday we'll get to meet in person, I'll get you on some Kong vaults, do some parkour, but when you start going at top speed, your judgment has to happen so quickly about where you're taking off. And if it's not, you're like clipping both knees and flying head first at your top speed over a brick wall. Moving at 90% when you know what 100% feels like is so much easier. And honestly, for a lot of people, I don't know why it can be like pulling teeth to get people to sprint 5 times. That is like just once or twice a week. I could not say this enough to anybody else. Just get out and run some accelerations, and especially just doing like a fly 20 where you're actually feeling that top speed. You're not going to use it in technical parkour, but knowing what that feels like in your body and giving your brain more experience to process at that speed is so helpful in those more technical situations.
Yeah. And also, if you want to make it fun, like, race your buddy. It's stupid.
Yes.
Either race your buddy or you stagger yourself a yard apart from each other and you chase each other. Like, your buddy's one up from you and you're one behind them. The person that's leading, they get to set the tone of when you start. As soon as they move, you're chasing his ass, and then you change it up. Just do 5 or 6 of those, and you'll be ready to go and do anything at that point. Like, that's also 100%. A thing. Like, if you're like lazy with warming up and stuff, just get ready to do some sprinting. Do a couple of those sprint reps, and you'll be like, oh, I'm ready to go. I'm firing on all cylinders, and I'm ready to kind of move into any movement that requires my lower body to do something explosive.
Absolutely. Don't race your wife. I'll say that. That could be problematic. From experience. Moving on now. So that one was a good question. We've got another one. This is from Charles St. John. It is, how do you adjust plyometric training if you are training for vertical output versus training for like broad jump, horizontal distance?
I mean, depends what your goal is. Like, if it's purely just to do vertical stuff, like I just want to go away and just get better at vertical stuff, then you just make it the whole thing. I tend to find that parkour is probably going to be a lot more horizontally focused than you think. So getting better at that is going to be pretty critical. You got to think of it in this way. Horizontally focused stuff, unless you're doing like 1-out takeoffs, like a broad jump, is very much more so about maintaining momentum. Whereas vertical jumping is more about changing the direction of your momentum. So you're changing it from moving horizontally into vertical orientation. Whereas you're skipping a stone when you're doing things like a set of strides. So it's, again, if you can't accelerate into a set of strides, you can't take speed in to then maintain. So if you're super slow, that can often be the first problem with you not being able to stride effectively. Like if you can't do the first like 1, 2, or even 3 strides into it, you're doomed. You're having to build speed through a highly technical thing. So like you want to be able to take some speed in and then just manage that momentum. So yeah, you got to think about it, managing momentum and then changing the orientation of your momentum. So if you have a goal of going out and just doing vertical stuff, then yeah, you can do that. You're going to be able to do less vertical orientated plyos, but most of the time it's probably going to be like 75% of your stuff is more horizontally focused and about 25 is more vertical focused.
Yeah, I do think there's an interesting thing in parkour that I've noticed in myself and some other athletes. I don't want to speak for Tim, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was also true for him. When you look at when you're measuring like static stuff, so if you're measuring broad jump, the vertical vector is very underpowered compared to how overpowered our ability is to produce force at maybe a steeper horizontal angle.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something that I'm curious how much that carries across, or if it's just because demographically it's a lot of little white boys that didn't play many vertical jumping sports. We need more volleyball and basketball athletes in the sport. Maybe it's just
I
a background thing.
I think it's a skill based thing. Or like if you can project it, like if you have a big jump horizontally from a static position, like a broad jump, you can have a big vertical jump. It's exactly the same thing. It's just how you're directing that force. And the vertical like component is just spending more time on the ground, or it is creating a braking force at an earlier point. That's literally it. Whereas a broad jump is about moving through the foot and then pressing out of it. Whereas a vertical jump, say you take a couple of strides into something and then you put your foot down and go 1, 2 and try and pop up. It's just about learning where and when to like put on the brakes and when to apply force. So yeah, if you can broad jump far, you can vertically jump high. And I've seen it.
You're giving me hope here. Yeah, I'm aiming for that. I had to test my vertical. It's been a while, but I think like my broad, last time I tested it was 10.3, toe to heel, and my vertical was like 33 inches, which I feel like is a little bit, and
Yeah.
that's standing. I do think though you're right that it's a skill issue, because I'm probably have done 15,000 broad jump repetitions
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
1,500 or fewer vertical jump
Yeah.
repetitions. So you get a bit of a difference. I do want to reiterate also your point about carrying speed. That is so underrated. I think a lot of parkour athletes, again, like my buddy John took me to this spot, and he was hitting, he was hopping across there like these little stones, and they're about 12 feet apart, and there's probably 20 of them. And my goal was to bound across all of them. I got 6 or 7, and then I was just so used to creating braking force when I was doing my technical parkour strides, I just could not maintain the speed.
Yeah.
And he did the bounds first try, no issue, and then hops on each leg all the way across 20 times. And
That's
that
crazy.
was like, oh, you're not going in faster than me, and I know that your individual sort of like stride sequence is not that much bigger than mine, but his ability to not slow down across it was
Yeah.
just on another level.
Yeah.
And that was a good eye-opening moment of, oh, it's actually just about carrying and maintaining speed. It's not
Yep.
about doing anything other than letting it rip.
Well, that's it, right? Like you may have felt like um, it wasn't even like any more than like 70 to 80%, but it's the execution and how you input that 70 to 80%. And if it's not fast enough, then you're always going to struggle with that maintenance of that. So, I mean, like I look at it from a sports science kind of perspective, and I'm like, it'd be interesting for you guys to be able to just, if you took footage of it, looking at someone that does it well and then someone that's struggling with the maintenance of locomotion on it, it'd be cool for you guys to just time how long they're spending on the ground and see how much. I mean, sometimes you can just look at joint angle, but like, geez, look how much deeper you are in comparison to that person that's just floating over them. If that person is just super tall and they don't have much knee bend, and the other person is super deep in that knee bend, that tells you a story.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And this one, I think it's also like if you're losing 2%, let's say you're just leaking 2% of your speed on each rep because you have that technical inefficiency, you haven't trained, maybe whether it's you're subconsciously braking a little bit more because you're used to having to hold back that split second before ground contact to make sure your foot's in the right spot, or you're not used to working at maximum velocity and your hamstrings are just like, oh wait, what are we having to do? We got to continue to
Yeah.
like maintain and generate horizontal force
Oh yeah.
also. It's tough. The hops for speed is something that I shared recently that was in your program with Tim, that I found to be really helpful because
Yeah.
it's technical and is interesting, but building up to speed and then trying to maintain it while going through that cycle was such a great
Yeah.
mental challenge. And actually having the free leg cycling through helped me a lot with the rhythm of it. It felt more like sprinting than
Yes.
trying to just do a bound for speed, which I think a lot of people maybe would default to because they assume it's technically easier. But without the knee drive and then cycling over your free leg, it
It's very different,
feels
right?
very
It's that
different.
swinging
Yeah.
action versus that pickup action. Yep. It's exactly
Yeah.
how I look at it. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, those were my favorite of the questions. Before we hop off and I let you go, where can people find you, and what program of yours would you recommend to any parkour athletes who are maybe out there that want to get some clinical plyometric experience?
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it means a lot. It's been a really good conversation. I mean, you can find all my stuff on my Instagram at McInnes Watson, McInnesWatson, or you can go to plusplyos.com. And I mean, within our Plus Plyos like training program subscription, we have a ton of different programs, and we have had quite a few athletes use our speed and power program, which is super simple. It's like 2 sessions a week that you could almost do it before a parkour session. Recently, I've added in some full programs. I've put our Plus Plyos system in and amongst the 1x20 system, which is pretty fun. So if you're new to lifting, like it's super simple lifting, keeps you relatively fresh, and you're also doing some speed work and some jumps work and plyos work in there. So that's a really great one. But honestly, just getting on our program and then just having access to whatever you want to kind of taste, then I think that's so well worth it. Yeah, and if there's kind of anything in particular that anyone wants help with, then it's just a case of just reaching out and having those conversations. I often end up consulting with quite a few people and just kind of helping them out in their particular scenario. And I think that sometimes those calls are just worth their weight in gold and can be enough for people to be like, oh, okay, I have a direct focus and I know exactly how I'm going to kind of paint that path for myself. So, but yeah, reaching out on Instagram is always a good start. And yeah, I speak to everyone that kind of messages me. So
Yeah, you responded to my DM very quickly. So slide into the DMs, people, if you have any questions. No, check out plusplyos.com first. And then if you're really, really confused and after you've spent money, then slide into the DMs. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been really fun. And I think everybody listening to this in the parkour community is going to get a ton of benefit from it. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it, man. It's a big community I'm learning from constantly. So it's a pleasure to be on.
That was so fun for me to get to chat with such an expert in his field and just such a chill guy. I think it was really cool to see how open he was to just taking everything that he's learned about plyometrics and cross-referencing it with parkour, and nerding out is always a blast with people who just love what they do. If you're not already following Matt online, Matt McInnes Watson or Plus Plyos, you can follow both. Check out his programming. I said it in the podcast as well, but I have done 2 rounds of his programming. It's really fantastic. And I think that all his points about the creating that clinical setting to isolate plyometric moving for parkour athletes, even though we do a ton of jumping, 100% valid. I definitely saw benefits from it. I've incorporated it in my own programming moving forward. Couldn't recommend it more. And just follow everything that he shares, because I think whether you're a coach or an athlete or just a fan of the community, his points about creating entry points for folks to embrace plyometric training, find how they can fit it into their training approach or lifestyle, is so valid and has so much value for us as we try to find those entry points to share all the things we love about parkour training with the broader public. And I took a ton out of that. I hope you did as well. There's so much to parse in this episode, and yeah, could not recommend following his stuff more and checking out all of his content. And if you have the money and you have the time and the desire, go check out his programming. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. Helps me stay motivated to bring on great guests like today's guest. I will catch y'all next week. Have a great week.